I'd seen her 100 times before. Through the years, she was always the same, polite smile, a quick, "How've you been?" The kind of interaction that never lingered long enough to mean anything. But that night, for reasons I still don't understand, she opened the door slower than usual. Long enough for my eyes to catch hers before drifting to the loose knot of her robe. "Come in, Liam," she said, stepping aside. Her voice was quiet, almost like she didn't want the house to hear. It was late. Too late for casual visits. I'd only come to return a jacket I'd borrowed from her son after basketball practice. He wasn't home. She told me he'd left for the weekend, and I almost handed her the jacket and left. Almost. The living room light was low, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. She walked ahead of me, barefoot, the robe brushing against her knees. I noticed how careful her steps were, how she seemed to be listening for something, or maybe avoiding it. "You can just drop it on the couch," she said, but when I set the jacket down, she turned, holding 2 glasses. "You're here. Might as well have something to drink." I didn't usually drink wine, but the glass felt warm in my hand. She sat across from me, one leg tucked under the other. The space between us was nothing, a coffee table, barely 2 feet. But every time she shifted, it felt smaller. We talked about harmless things at first, work, the heat, the way time moves too fast. But something was different. Her eyes didn't dart away like they used to. Mine didn't either. "You've grown up," she said at one point, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. She said it like it was a fact she just realized, and for some reason, my chest tightened. "I guess I have," I answered, but my voice was softer than I meant. Silence sat between us, but it wasn't empty. Her breathing was slow, and mine was trying to match it without being obvious. She leaned forward to set her glass down, and her robe slipped just enough for me to see the curve of her shoulder. I looked away too late. She noticed. "Do you ever think about things you shouldn't?" she asked suddenly. I swallowed. "Sometimes." Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Me too." The air felt heavier now. She brushed a piece of hair behind her ear, but her eyes stayed on mine. My pulse was a drum in my ears, and before I could think of anything worth saying, she leaned closer, not enough to close the distance, but enough to make me feel like gravity was pulling us together. Her hand grazed mine, fingers light, almost testing. Neither of us moved away. I should have thought about my friend, about what this meant, but all I could think about was her. She whispered something I didn't catch, and then her lips were so close that the warmth of her breath touched mine. And then, just for a second, they brushed. It wasn't a kiss. Not fully. Just the ghost of one. Enough to leave me wanting more. Enough to make it impossible to leave. That's when the doorbell rang. The sound of the doorbell jolted us apart. She straightened her robe, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear like nothing had happened. I stayed frozen, pulse still catching up to what almost happened. "It's probably a delivery," she said, her voice steady, too steady. She didn't look at me as she crossed the room. When she opened the door, it was just a neighbor dropping off mail that had been misdelivered. But the interruption had already done its work. The moment we'd been in was gone, or at least, it should have been. I should have stood up, mumbled something about having to leave. Instead, I stayed, my hand still resting on my knee where hers had almost been. Her son's mom. My friend's mom. Mid-40s. Divorced for years, sure, but that didn't make it any less wrong. If my friend ever found out. No. I shouldn't even think about it. "You're quiet," she said, setting the mail on the counter. I shrugged, trying to look casual. "Just thinking." She poured herself a little more wine, but her eyes flicked to me. "About?" I almost lied. I almost told her something safe, something about basketball or work. Instead, I said, About the fact that I probably shouldn't be here this late. Her lips pressed together, not in disapproval, more like she was weighing something. Maybe not, she admitted. Then softer. But you are. She sat back down, a little closer this time. The scent of her perfume was faint, like it had been hours since she'd put it on, but I noticed it anyway. We didn't talk for a while. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than before. She glanced at me once, twice, like she was trying to decide if I'd crossed the space between us. I remember when you were 16, she said suddenly, a half smile on her lips. You came here after practice once, dripping sweat, and you were so embarrassed you wouldn't even sit on the couch. I laughed quietly. I remember. You gave me a towel and told me not to worry about the cushions. Her eyes softened. You've changed. I didn't know if she meant physically, or in some other way. I didn't ask. When she reached for her glass, her knee brushed mine. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. The part of me that still thought logically knew I should have moved, said goodnight, and walked out. But the part of me that had felt her breath against my lips minutes ago couldn't. Her fingers tapped lightly against her glass, like she was trying to distract herself. Then she set it down and leaned back, looking at me in a way that felt like a question she wasn't asking out loud. I didn't answer it. Not with words. Just with the fact that I stayed exactly where I was. The clock on the wall read nearly midnight. I should have left hours ago. She knew it, too. I saw it in the way her fingers curled around her wine glass without drinking, in how she kept glancing at the window as though the night itself might tell on us. Then her phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up. The screen lit her face, softer now, unreadable. It's my ex, she said finally. He doesn't usually call this late. I looked away, suddenly aware of how small the room felt. She stood, walking a few steps toward the kitchen before answering. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the strain under it. Short sentences. A forced laugh. Then silence. When she came back, her robe was tied tighter, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. He's stopping by in the morning to drop off some things, she said, almost to herself. That a problem? I asked. Her gaze met mine, sharp for a second, then soft. It could be. The words sat heavy between us. She moved to gather the glasses, but when her hand brushed mine, she froze. We both did. You should. She started, but stopped. Go? I asked. Her lips parted like she might say yes. Instead, stay. Just a little longer. Something in my chest tightened. I knew this was dangerous. She knew it too. But she still sat down beside me, closer than before. The warmth of her leg against mine was enough to make it hard to think straight. Liam, she began, her voice low, unsure. She didn't finish. The front door rattled. We both turned. It was just the wind, the latch hadn't caught properly. She stood to fix it, and I followed her without thinking. When she leaned forward to push the door closed, I was suddenly inches behind her. She turned, startled by how close I was. For a second, either of us moved. Her eyes searched mine, and I could see it, the conflict, the want, the hesitation. I leaned in, just enough to feel the warmth of her breath again. My hand almost found her waist, but at the last second, she stepped back. We can't, she whispered. But it didn't sound final. Her phone buzzed again on the counter, breaking the moment. She glanced at it, then back at me. You should go before I make a mistake, she said. I nodded slowly, but when I stepped toward the door, she caught my hand, just for a second. Long enough to make it clear that whatever this was, it wasn't over. It had been 3 days. 3 days since I'd walked out of her house with her touch still burning in my hand. 3 days since her almost whispered we can't. I told myself I wouldn't see her again, at least not alone. But when I showed up to drop off something her son had left at my place, the street was quiet. His car wasn't there. Hers was. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Neither should you," I replied before I could stop myself. The faintest smile tugged at her lips, but it faded quickly. "Come in. Just for a minute." The house felt different this time. Brighter. The curtains were open, letting late afternoon sunlight spill across the floor. But the air between us was still heavy. We stood in the kitchen, her on one side of the counter, me on the other, like the space would protect us from something we both knew was coming. "How's your dad?" she asked. Small talk, the safest thing she could reach for. "He's fine," I said, though my mind was nowhere near family updates. "How's your ex?" The question caught her off guard. Her hand tightened around the edge of the counter. "Why?" "I saw how you looked after he called." Her eyes narrowed. "That's none of your business, Liam." I should have dropped it. But something inside me, something I didn't want to name, wouldn't let go. "It is if it's the reason you keep pushing me away." Her breath caught, and for a second I thought she'd tell me I was wrong. Instead, she laughed once, softly, bitterly. "You think that's why?" She walked around the counter, closing the distance until she was just a foot away. "You're my son's friend," she said quietly. "You're 22. I'm 46. And you—" Her voice faltered, eyes flicking to my mouth before returning to mine. "You make it hard to remember why this is a bad idea." Her words landed like a confession and a warning at the same time. My pulse thundered. "I don't care about the reasons," I said. My voice was rougher than I intended. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut me off. We both turned toward the window. Her son's car. Her eyes went wide. She stepped back, hands curling into fists like she could physically hold back whatever had almost happened. "Go," she said, her voice urgent now. But my feet didn't move. "Liam," she warned. "If you stay." I took a step toward her anyway. Close enough that I could see the faint tremor in her hands, the way her lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. The front door latch clicked. The front door swung open before I could take another step. "Hey, Mom!" his voice called from the entryway. Her eyes locked on mine, wide, pleading, and I moved fast, slipping into the hallway that led to the laundry room. I could hear them talking, her voice casual but with a tight edge, his steps moving further into the house. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, until the sound of a cabinet opening gave me cover to slip out the back door. My heart was pounding hard enough to feel it in my fingertips. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A text from her, "We need to talk." I hesitated before replying, but minutes later, I was outside her house again. This time, she met me at the back door, her robe replaced with a sweater, hair tied back. "You didn't tell me," she said, skipping any greeting. "Tell you what?" Her arms were crossed, but it wasn't the defensive kind, it was to hold herself together. "That he knows." The air in my lungs froze. "Knows what?" I asked, but it came out too quickly, too sharp. She stepped closer, her voice low. "He asked me tonight if something was going on between us. He said he's noticed the way you look at me." My stomach dropped. "And what did you say?" "I told him no," she said. "That there's nothing to notice." "But—" her eyes flicked toward the floor. "I think he knew I was lying." The weight of it hit me all at once. I thought we'd been careful. Glances too quick for anyone to catch, conversations kept light when others were around. But maybe we hadn't been careful enough. "What do we do?" I asked. She shook her head. "We can't give him a reason to keep asking. We have to stop." It should have been the logical conclusion. The right one. But the way her voice caught on the last word told me she didn't want it any more than I did. "You really want to stop?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time, and in that silence, everything we hadn't said filled the space. The almost kisses, the moments that had hung just one heartbeat too long. Her answer was barely a whisper. No. The confession settled between us like something fragile, dangerous. I stepped forward, my hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. We can be careful, I said. More careful. Her lips pressed together in thought, but before she could answer, a light flicked on in the hallway. Footsteps. She grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the back door. Go, she whispered, before this gets worse. But as I left, I realized something had already changed. We weren't just hiding from the world anymore. We were hiding from someone who knew exactly where to look. It rained all afternoon. The kind that soaks through your clothes before you've even made it to the door. By the time I knocked, my hair was plastered to my forehead, my jacket clinging to me. She opened the door without a word, eyes wide like she'd been waiting, or hoping, for me. Inside, the air was warm, but her expression wasn't. He knows, she said, her voice breaking the silence before I could take off my jacket. He asked me again today. And this time, I didn't lie. My chest tightened. You told him? Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I told him that you mean more to me than I ever expected. I took a step closer. And? He didn't take it well. Her eyes flicked up to mine. He told me to choose. You or him. The words hit like a physical blow. I thought about all the times we'd sat in this room, pretending there was still a line we hadn't crossed. There wasn't any more. What do you want? I asked. It came out rough, like I already knew the answer but needed to hear it from her. She looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see hesitation, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting something too long. I want you, she said. But I can't lose him. The truth of it settled between us, sharp and unrelenting. It wasn't just about an age gap, or what people would say. It was about a bond she'd had for 22 years, one that no romance, no matter how deep, could replace. I moved closer, close enough to see the rain still caught in her lashes. Then maybe we stop hiding, I said. Tell him it's not a choice between us, because it's not the same kind of love. Her lips trembled. You make it sound simple. It is, I said, even though we both knew it wasn't. We stood there, the storm outside rattling the windows, her hand hovering just inches from mine. Then she took it, her grip tight, like she was afraid of what would happen if she let go. If we do this, she whispered, there's no going back. I leaned in, forehead touching hers. There never was. Her breath caught, and then she kissed me. Not a brush, not a hesitation. A real kiss, unguarded, everything we'd been holding back breaking loose. When we finally pulled apart, the sound of the rain filled the silence. I'll talk to him tomorrow, she said. I nodded, but deep down, I knew tomorrow could go 100 different ways. All I knew for sure was that, for tonight she was here. And so was I. The morning after the storm, I sat in my car outside her house, hands gripping the steering wheel. I could see her through the kitchen window, moving slowly, like each step carried the weight of a decision she couldn't undo. She texted me late last night, come by after I talked to him. When the door finally opened, she stepped out in a coat, her hair pulled back, face bare of makeup. She didn't look like someone who had just won or lost. She looked like someone who had been through a fire and was still catching her breath. Walk with me, she asked. We went down the street, leaves still wet from the rain. For a while, we didn't talk. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore, just real. I told him everything, she said at last. Not just about us. About how lonely I've been. How I've been pretending for years that I was fine. My chest tightened. How did he take it? She exhaled slowly. He's hurt. Angry. But I think he understood more than I expected. He asked me if I loved you. I stopped walking. And you said? She turned to face me, eyes steady. I said yes. The word hung in the cold morning air between us, and for the first time since this began, there was nothing left to hide. What happens now? I asked. She smiled faintly, not with certainty, but with the kind of hope that survives storms. We take it slow. We don't pretend it's simple. And we don't hide anymore. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd imagined in the beginning. It was better, something raw, fragile, and completely ours. We walked back in silence, her hand brushing mine until I took it. It was a small thing, but it felt like the first step towards something that might actually last. When we reached her house, she turned to me. You should give him time. I should, too. But you're not going anywhere, are you? I shook my head. Not unless you tell me to. Her fingers squeezed mine, and for a moment neither of us cared about the rest of the world, just the fact that we'd made it here, to this impossible, imperfect place. As I drove away later, I didn't feel the panic I'd had at the start of all this. I felt steady. Like we'd finally stopped running from the truth. Maybe the road ahead would be messy. Maybe people wouldn't understand. But we did. And for now, that was enough.